What's this? A MIFF roundup? One of those videos I put out every year that are easily my least watched, but I like doing them, so I guess it's just a thing I do now. I'm doing a bit of a different format this time. I'm not in front of the camera. I want to keep it short, especially for films I don't have a lot to say about. But I'm going to try and keep it focused on, like, here's what I thought, here's what I think the hook is, here's, if it's going to appeal to you, here's how it's going to appeal. And as always, I'm just talking about them in the order in which I saw them. I haven't ranked them beyond that. A toxic love affair that restages periodically for 500 years, possibly for all of time, depending on what some of the symbolism means. Timestalker was directed by Alice Lowe, who directed Prevenge, which, full disclosure, I have not yet seen, and was in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, which I have seen. Agnes is always obsessed with Alex, Alex never loves her back, Meg is always in love with Agnes, Agnes's obsession with Alex always gets her killed, often by George, whether in dog form or husband form. Scipio does his best, but is just kind of hoping someone gets killed so he can leave. I think that's the vibe on Scipio. That was my reading. To be as vague as possible, something I really appreciated is that when Agnes achieves personal enlightenment, when she realizes she's in a toxic pattern, she isn't satisfied with just realizing it or just getting herself out of it. The personal is not enough. She has to actually, do something. She has to reach out to her community and help them improve things for themselves as well. Agnes was choosing Alex because she thought he would fix what was missing from her life, and when that didn't work, the answer wasn't to turn inwards and find it in herself, but to turn outwards and find it in community. It also gets weird with it and has a dance sequence, and as we know from last year's roundup, I like when films get weird with it and have dance sequences. Grand Theft Hamlet is about two actors in lockdown who stage a production of Hamlet in GTA Online. One of them is married to a documentarian who recorded the event, and so the film documents the process of producing and performing it. A really amazing combination of high and low art, both the seriousness of one of the great tragedies and the ridiculousness of Grand Theft Auto and its many possible actions.
Stan Ho, who's there?
Friends to this ground, I think?
I don't think so!
And liegeman to the Dane.
Shit, that's the fucking police.
Oh, farewell, honest soldier. Who has relieved you?
They have to, try to find the right emotes to fit the scenes. They have to fend off other players. There are some incredibly well-timed in-game deaths. There's just something truly delightful about seeing the wasted screen with Rosencrantz has killed you as the explainer. Also just some genuinely touching moments and really interesting analysis that become available just by having Hamlet play out in the setting of GTA Online by people who, have been stuck inside for a really long time. This film is very much an artifact of lockdown, especially those last sort of 6 months or so when everyone's kind of given up on their lockdown side hustles and everyone's really wondering how much longer are we going to be here, and then some people start going out and going back to work again. In some countries, this is streaming on Mubi, so you might be able to check it out. This isn't even a sponsor plug for Mubi. I'm just giving you that information. Sponsor me, Mubi. I dare you. You won't, you're scared. Moving is a 1993 Japanese coming-of-age drama about a girl coping with her parents' divorce, and it's recently received a very nice restoration. Really beautiful cinematography, very nicely restored. The plot does a really good job of placing the blame kind of everywhere without placing it nowhere. Of course Ren's dad is being weird and distant. What choice does he have? He doesn't have shared custody. And of course her mother is bitter and doesn't see Ren's point of view. She's excited about her new life and upset that Ren can't share that excitement. And of course Ren is acting out. She's upset and she doesn't have any other way to express her feelings. I thought this was a really fantastic movie and I recommend it. I don't have much to say beyond that. Just a really sweet coming-of-age film. Alright, second restoration of the festival. I saw The Cars That Ate Paris, which is a restoration of Peter Weir's debut film. The experience of watching this is very similar to watching Get Out, where you spend 90% of it absolutely certain that something completely fucked is going on, and that if you just look in the right places you could find it, but the only information you have is the information the protagonist has, so until he finds out, you are completely at sea. Unless you read the Wikipedia page that reveals the end in the first paragraph, and I'm not against that in the sense of it being a spoiler, but because it completely undercuts the narrative tension. I'm generally of the opinion that if a plot synopsis is going to reveal all of the information, it should reveal it in the same order that the film does. To that end, I won't even tell you what happens in this film beyond the fact that Arthur and his brother are in a car crash on the outskirts of an Australian country town called Paris. Arthur survives, but his brother dies, and while Arthur is invited to live in Paris, it becomes clear very quickly that it wasn't an invitation so much as an edict that will be enforced through the method of everyone in the town acting just so weird. Even casual conversations point to something being badly wrong in the town, like the orderly, completely unprompted, in the middle of an unrelated conversation, gives Arthur some very gory details about his brother's death. The film captures a really interesting moment in both Australian film history and just Australian history. It points a lot to colonial anxieties, which Weir would also do in Picnic at Hanging Rock. The beginning of the film has Arthur looking for work in town after town, and these country towns are here so that the colony and the Commonwealth can spread, but all the people are leaving, which means the jobs are leaving, which means the people are leaving. The mayor of Paris is trying to keep the town together and the population stable and happy, but ironically, trying to enforce his version of a stable town and a happy population is what makes it so unstable. There's one moment that I really want to know more about. So, there's a plot point where one of the local youths is out hooning and crashes into the mayor's front garden and destroys a bunch of lawn ornaments, one of which is an offensive caricature of an Indigenous person. And this comes up when the police are questioning their suspect. The statue is just in pieces, and the police officer's holding it up as there's this symbol of the destruction the youth has caused, and it's the line is something like, this is the mayor's Aboriginal. It's really interesting as an examination of colonial violence, just because of the fact that this offensive statue was the closest to a non-white person that the town has, and it's an object that belongs to the mayor that is used as decoration. And I really want to know how intentional that was, because I could see it being, at the time, just seen as some, naff lawn art that a Bogan family would have, and the scene only has this reading if you see it now, but, given how much the rest of the film does have, some level of engagement with the legacy of colonialism, I wouldn't be surprised if it was intentional. Peter Weir, please respond, I guess. Us and the Night is an experimental film about communication, understanding, and language. It was filmed at the UQ Library, and it was just such a treat to watch a beautiful and complicated film that was set in the place where I developed my appreciation for film as an art form. I have walked those aisles, I have studied at those tables, I have put my head down on those very desks and cried. The film is a testament to how complicated and contradictory the English language is, especially if you're learning it as a second language, but also how that complexity contains within it the tremendous capacity for beauty and poetry. A lot of films I saw this year had some amazing sound design, and this is one of them. Between the sounds and the whole general vibe, this somehow felt exactly like a rainy night in Brisbane, or if not a rainy night, then one of those really humid nights or evenings when the sky looks completely washed out, the whole world has the same color grading as Miami Vice, and you just know it's going to be raining the next day, and is this going to be normal rain? Is it going to be rain that's heavy in a manageable way? Is this going to be a repeat of the 2011 floods? It's hard to describe the plot of I Saw the TV Glow in a way that tells you what you're actually in for when you watch it. This is very much a movie where the question of what is it about can't be answered by describing the events that happen in it. The events that happen in the plot surround two high school friends who are obsessed with a TV show called The Pink Opaque. One of the friends goes missing very soon after the show is cancelled. But what the movie is about is the experience of either not realizing or refusing to admit to yourself that you are transgender. It is possible to keep yourself so busy that you never have to think about why your relationship with your body and your gender is so uncomfortable. But the problem with that is that one day you won't be busy anymore. Something will force you to stop and think about it. Why do you think so many eggs cracked in lockdown? Something I really was not expecting is Fred Durst. He gave a very good performance. He wasn't on screen much, but when he was really good. This gives credence to a theory I have, which is that if we let Fred Durst do enough things, we will find the thing he is really good at. Limp Bizkit is what it is. The film he directed was a critical and popular flop, but I do think there's something he's extremely good at, and the trick to finding it will just be to give him as many tasks as possible. Maybe it's running Twitter. Maybe we should put him in charge of Twitter. He'll probably rename it from X, maybe to something new and worse, but I do think we should let him run Twitter. Now, the trans allegory is the obvious one, but it is also beautiful and heartbreaking as a story about childhood and about growing up and not growing up and being embarrassed about the things that brought you joy as a child and not indulging in those things you think are embarrassing because you're a grown-up now and that's supposed to mean something. Owen asks if the pink opaque is for kids. His dad asks if it's for girls. There's so much that just puts gender expression in the same box as your childhood toys. It's something you're supposed to grow out of. It's something you're supposed to already have grown out of. It's also really interesting as an interrogation of narrative, of what we expect a narrative structure to be. Jane Schoenbrunn has said this in interviews, that it's sort of a challenge to the hero's journey because Owen is just constantly refusing the call to adventure, again and again and again. I saw the TV Glow does something truly amazing in that it perfectly depicts how it feels to watch Buffy for the first time at exactly the right point in your life, and how it feels to watch something you loved many years ago only for it to not feel the same. My theory is that the reason the pink opaque hit different for adult Owen is that it was remastered badly, so it's a bit like watching Buffy on streaming and everyone's weirdly smooth and sometimes they don't crop the shots right so you can see the crew at the edge of the frame. The soundtrack has so many classics from the 90s, but they're all covers, and that's just such a perfect metaphor for how returning to something you used to love is never going to feel the same, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you'll get something new out of it, or maybe it's an experience you should leave in your childhood. There are books and movies and TV shows that I loved that were formative to me as a kid, but that I'm deliberately never going to engage with again because I want to keep them as childhood experiences. But there are also movies I loved as a child that I revisit constantly and drag everyone I know along for the ride. I'm really glad that I went into this movie knowing it would kick my heart in the ass, both as a former weird kid who retreated into fantasy and as a former teenager who didn't know how to express what they were feeling about their body and their gender. Though I will argue that even in how heartbreaking it is, this is a deeply, fundamentally, aggressively hopeful film. And a lot of that hinges on the chalk drawing that's, the there is still time drawing. The final scene is the end of the movie, but it's not the end of these characters. They are going to keep living. They're going to keep growing. There is still time. I didn't know much about Mogwai going into this documentary, and to be honest, I kind of still don't. There were some neat bits, but overall the documentary just kind of didn't have much to it. I think it was just trying to do too much. There were bits about the history of the band, what their music means to people, how they put music together, but it really could have used more focus. It felt like there was the least on how they put the music together, and I found that to be the most interesting part, so maybe that could have been the focus and the rest could have just been extra peripheral stuff. It would be easy to say that Problemista takes the immigration process and makes it absurd, but I think what's actually happening is the other way around. It is taking the absurdity of the immigration process and making it literal. Julio Torres plays Alejandro, who gets fired from his job at a cryogenic freezing facility, and then has a limited time to find a new job with a boss who will sponsor his visa, or he will cease to exist. He takes a job with Elizabeth, whose assistants never seem to stick around for long for reasons that Elizabeth could avoid very easily, but doesn't. Problemista does something that art is able to do when it takes a, let's call it, less than straightforward approach to storytelling, in that it takes a ridiculous premise and then boils it down to the real emotions at its core. There are so many just little performance things that I really appreciate, Alejandro always walks with these odd little steps, and Elizabeth's phone torch is always on. It's beautiful, it's poetic, it's outstanding. Unfortunately, I have been cursed by a wizard, and that curse forces me to recall with perfect clarity the remake of Heathers, and that is why I thought it was nice to see that James Scully's career didn't peak there. He was in Phantasmus as well, so I like to think that Julio Torres just watched the Heathers remake and saw James Scully acting his little heart out and thinking, oh no, this will not do. I will find a role for you. This film ends on a really lovely note, and not to get too deep into the details, but the ending concerns a piece of art that is confusing and inconvenient, but will reward people who take the time to understand it. And it was both a neat way to describe how to interact with this film, but also how to interact with art in general. I think, in general, people need to be a bit more relaxed about not understanding art. If something doesn't make sense immediately, just think about it, try to work out why it doesn't make sense and if it's even a problem that it doesn't make sense. And if you can't make it make literal sense, perhaps it can make a kind of emotional sense. And this isn't a new problem, but it is a problem that's exacerbated by studios who seem to reward fandoms who throw tantrums. So I fucking loved The Forbidden Room, so I was really excited to see Guy Maddin's next film. But I gotta say, Rumours was just okay. The film follows a G7 summit where the world leaders have to draft a preliminary statement on a crisis that is never explained in detail, but at some point, everyone but the G7 leaders disappear and bog zombies surface and start shambling about to an unclear objective. This film is incredibly earnest, and I'm glad it exists, but I don't know, there's just something missing. I think I appreciated Rumours more than I enjoyed it. For the whole film, I tried to think about, does this need to be the G7? But, I couldn't think of what else it would be. If it were just a group of friends or a family out camping, then the political aspect might feel shoehorned in, even though politics and political themes will inevitably surface out of such a film and such a plot. So in a way, by setting it at the G7, the film front loads politics in a way that avoids any potential accusations of being needlessly political. But that said, as a political satire, it kind of doesn't have teeth, and I don't know how it could have been given teeth without making it worse in some important ways. There are some genuinely quite funny moments. Thanks to this film, I have been calling my work lanyard the pendant by which I am known. And also, I love the fact that Charles Dance did not do an American accent, and the film does not explain why. Visually, this film is fantastic. More films should do weird shit with their visuals, and this film gets weird with it, and therefore I have to give it credit for getting weird with it. No dance sequence, though. Maybe that would have saved it. The thing about, when films get weird with it, then when they're not very good, at least they're not good in an interesting way. But if films refuse to do anything, abstract or unusual, then they're bad in the same way that every bad film is bad. A Traveller's Needs was a classic Hong Sang-soo film, thoroughly pleasant. As far as plot goes, Isabelle Huppert plays Iris, who in theory teaches French in Korea through a method that is unusual and untested, and that she admits she's not 100% sure it works. A Traveller's Needs has all the Hong Sang-soo classics: long takes, minimal camera movement, naturalistic dialogue. At one point, the camera zooms in on a dog for what seems like no reason other than to zoom in on a dog. There are these great sort of structured moments that are very interesting. Iris has the same conversation multiple times. There's two different women who she's teaching French, and both of them play an instrument, and while they're playing, she finds a reason to go outside both times. And then she talks to both of them afterwards, and they both express the same feeling about how they played. As with Walk Up, which I talked about in last year's MIFF Roundup, this is a film where events are alluded to rather than shown. The mother of a man Iris has been staying with is frightened both that he's being scammed or hurt and that he is trying to replace her. She mentions that she's been doing her best to parent after some event that is never described in detail but is clearly on their minds the whole conversation. People talk about Iris and wonder why she's in Korea, but they never ask her. They just remember after she's left that that's something they wanted to know. Pepe is a sort of fictionalized, sort of based on true events experimental film about a hippo that escaped from Pablo Escobar's private zoo and the consequences of that escape. At the moment that Pepe dies, he gains perfect clarity about his life and begins narrating in the hope that his story will be understood. I liked what this film was going for, but I don't think it landed at all. It's great when it's from Pepe's point of view, but the plot just spends too much time with the human characters who are not as interesting. Pepe's voiceover says that people aren't interested in his story, and then the film moves away from him. And I don't care about the people, I care about Pepe. Show me this hippo. Also, and this might be nitpicky, and it's definitely more about whatever company did the subtitles than the filmmakers, but I would have really liked the subtitles to mention what language was being spoken, because it seemed like language and translation was a major theme, and just knowing what language was being spoken would have added layers to that. According to the description on the MIFF website, Pepe himself speaks Spanish, Afrikaans, and Mbukushu, a dialect of Namibia. So he is speaking in the language of the place his parents were born, the language of people who colonized that place, and the language brought to Colombia by its own colonizers. Everything this film touched on is really interesting, from the hubris of bringing hippos into Colombia, the situation of the workers who actually had to do it, the people affected by those hippos escaping, and how dealing with those hippos gets presented to the public. There's this really great moment where a news reporter is horrified that the immediate reaction to Pepe is to try to kill him, but the news report is presented after we've already seen that a hippo is a legitimately life-threatening situation to people who live on the river, and that's just something the newscaster has no experience with. I'm disappointed that this film didn't work because it is such an interesting idea. Like, they could have cut out about 20 minutes of the human story, or even just in total been like a 60-minute tone poem from Pepe's point of view. I think that would have worked a lot better. The Queens of Concrete follows 3 teenage skaters on their journey to try out for the Olympic skateboarding team. It's an athlete's journey with the complicating factor that they're not just trying to excel at a sport, but everyone in that sport sort of has a chip on their shoulder about it being taken seriously. This gives them all this extra pressure because they're not just trying to do well for the sake of their sporting career, but also for the sake of the view of that sport in the public eye and for the perception of women in that sport. My full review will be published in Screen Hub soon, so when it comes out I'll add the links to the description, but for now I'll say that you'll enjoy this if you're interested in skating, women's sports, sports documentaries, and I'll give you some extra thoughts that didn't make the review because they're only sort of tangentially related. During my brief time as a skater, in which I learned to tic-tac and successfully ollied exactly once, I got the impression that skating was all about freedom of expression and stuff, which to me seems like it would be hard to fit into a competition format, and that's something the documentary tackles in that the subjects deal with how focusing on the competition kind of sucked the joy out of the sport. I tend to agree with the take that the Olympics doesn't deserve skateboarding. I sort of feel the same thing about breakdancing. Like, there's just something about the art form that feels like it shouldn't be squeezed into the form it needs to take for the Olympics. Like, obviously both skateboarding and breakdancing have the capacity to be competitive, but there's just something about how that competition is transposed from the communities where the sport was built into an Olympic format where, like, it has to be judged in as objective a capacity as possible that just does something to it. And look, that's just the vibe I get as an outside observer, especially given the fact that this year the breakdancer at the Olympics who got all the attention was the one who scored 0 in all categories, and not like, you know, someone who won gold or did even slightly okay. No one at all. Every movie with Dan Stevens in it is a movie that Matthew Crawley died for, so I always find myself putting them in one of 2 categories, either not worth it or stay dead, loser. Cuckoo gets an enthusiastic stay dead, loser. A family travels to a resort in the Bavarian Alps, and their teenage daughter, who is in the midst of grieving her biological mother, realizes that shit is fucked and gets pursued by a mysterious woman with violent intent. Dan Stevens does some excellent scenery chewing. Look at him, being all creepy and European, playing his little flute. Wonderful. Hunter Schafer does great work grounding the film in her character's experience. She plays Gretchen as both a believably shitty teen and as a young adult trying to figure out her next step just as her whole support system is upended. You can understand why her father reacts the way he does to her behaviour, but you also feel her pain and her sense of abandonment. How scary this film is really rests in the sound design, so I'm glad I got to see it on the big screen. And if you see it and you feel yourself too scared, just cover your ears. You know, that's how to watch any scary movie, basically. If you're too scared, don't bother covering your eyes. Cover your ears. I won't say much about The Demon Disorder because I wrote a review of it, so you can go read that. But I will say that writing a review of a film about 3 brothers and their demon-possessed father at a remote property while I was on my way to a remote property to spend the weekend with my partner, his 2 brothers, and their father was interesting. Cool, so that's everything I saw at MIFF. You know what? I'll talk about some highlights. I think my favourite... Cool, I'll just burp right in the middle. Anyway. So the 2 standouts were probably... I saw the TV Glow and Problemista, but, like, honestly, they're probably the ones that you've already heard of before watching this video. Let's see... Of the 3 documentaries... I did see 3 documentaries, right? My favourite would have been Grand Theft Hamlet. That was just so bizarre and odd and unusual. Sound design. Who had the best sound design? I'm going to give that to Cuckoo. It was very interesting, and, like, the sound told a lot of the story. Like, it was absolutely vitally important that they get it exactly right. Alrighty, best Australian film. I'm going to give that to... I'm going to give it to Us and the Night, just because of the personal connection. I like it because it was filmed at UQ. Alright. Wettest Puppets. The horror film that had the wettest puppets was The Demon Disorder. Yep, that's it. Alright. That's enough awards. Thank you everyone for watching. Like and subscribe, YouTube, etc. Interact with the system. Thank you. If you like what I do, even though I've been doing it admittedly very sporadically because I've become unsustainably busy. But I do have a Patreon where you can join these lovely people in my hilariously short credits. Until next time, stay safe and say hi to your pets for me.